Thank you for inviting us today. My name is Sian Langford. I am the Facilities, Compliance and Sustainability Manager at the hospital with far too long a name, the Robert James and Agnes Orthopaedic NHS Foundation Trust. Now you know why we call it RJH here. And I've got with me today Anna Morris, who is our clinical lead for infection prevention and control. We're going to take you through a little bit of our journey. I will say that we are here to be brave, we're here to be open, and probably in some instances here to share a little bit of our dirty laundry. It's not easy, but we recognise that we have a story to tell, and I hope that there's something that you can take away from what's been a very tricky couple of years for us in rural Shropshire. Our approach has definitely been that we consider that we've got a story to tell, and we tell that story in a way that we think, what would we want to have heard at the beginning of this journey, and what would have been helpful for us now? And a lot of that process has involved asking sometimes very uncomfortable questions, but we now sort of know other questions that we needed to be asking, and we weren't necessarily doing so.
So just a little bit about our trust. We are predominantly an elective orthopaedic hospital, so we don't tend to look after patients who are really sick. We fix their orthopaedic need and then they go home and then they're happy. We do have a Midlands Centre for Spinal Injuries unit, which is probably our most risky area in terms of infections. We have quite a complex mix of patients in that unit. But historically, we have had low levels of infection. And statistically, we were constantly achieving our HAI objectives. We had occasional outbreaks, not very often, around 2 outbreaks in about an 8-year period. And our cleaning audits were always above the national target. So we were, as an IPC team and estates and facilities, very comfortably reassured at the time that everything was absolutely fine. And then what happened? We had not 1, not 2, but 3 outbreaks of MRSA in a 12-month period. So as you can imagine, that attracted a lot of attention from our colleagues at NHS England, who subsequently visited the site and found perceived cleanliness issues within the spinal injuries unit. Attendance at trust outbreak meetings led NHS England to conclude that there was insufficient ownership of the issues, and even when we gave assurance, it wasn't being provided by the right people. So IPC were doing IPC, cleaning was being done by the cleaners. And NHSE lacked assurance that the trust knew who was responsible for cleaning important items, and the shop floor teams often giving us conflicting answers or responding to questions with, I don't know. So this then, initial oversight led to a lot of defensiveness, and we stood by our individual assurance and reference the many accepted barriers to improvement of the issues being raised, both financially, operationally, and the teams retreated and became quite defensive.
And actually, regardless of any cleaning issues, any staffing competencies, any of the very many process reviews that we had both internally and externally. It was a fridge, just like this one, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. This fridge was not in an area that had an outbreak. It was actually on our private ward at the other end of the hospital. It was broken and it just needed replacing. We just needed to take the old fridge out and pop a new one in. But for us, this fridge is actually a really good example of 2 critical issues that we now know that we had. The first is that we absolutely worked in silos. For example, the ward manager in this area had requested a new fridge, but our actions were always taken in isolation. They lacked the bigger picture, so whether that fridge has actually been delivered or installed was not part of her field of vision. And secondly, we absolutely measured reassurance rather than assurance. We considered that if the fridge had been requested, the action was therefore complete. And we had a nice tick on our action plan, which didn't really fly on re-inspection 3 months later when the same broken fridge was sat in the same ward kitchen and hadn't, in fact, been replaced because it had never been delivered. We sort of identified at this point that we needed to reframe how we work together and what our actual understanding as a group of what problem solving needed to be at RJH. But before describing what our approach to solving some of our problems was, we thought it was really important to actually take note of some of the personal reflections of both ourselves and of our wider team at this time. And I'm sure many of you can relate when we say it doesn't matter how hard that we try, we take failings seriously in our job, we take it home, and we think that we have done something wrong. The ward and departments managers felt massively isolated. They describe themselves now as feeling like they were being picked on for failing. Our IPC colleagues absolutely felt responsible. They were totally overwhelmed by the sheer volume of actions that were absolutely everywhere we turned in every ward and department around the trust. And as an estates and facilities team, we just felt blamed. There was no direction, there was no clear process. We had lists coming out of our ears, but absolutely nobody could tell us what was the top priority and what was the highest risk. And then the journey began. And as with many journeys, this wasn't smooth sailing, and it's been quite easy to summarise it into 10 slides, but it definitely hasn't felt like that at times. There were many false starts, and we really didn't get it right straight away. We had external support provided, but that external support wasn't always welcomed, often felt like someone was being parachuted in to solve all of our problems, but they lacked the understanding of the trust culture, and I'm sure many trusts say exactly as we do. It's very special at the Robert Jones, and we needed that understanding to come across in our problem-solving approach. The scrutiny that we were under was extreme and absolutely exhausting. The inspections were coming at such a rate that we couldn't solve actions before the next person was coming to tell us what we were doing wrong and adding to our list. And the accountability, particularly at the beginning and the first few months, still sat with a core group of working group members, and we constantly got comments from external assessors to say, you're telling us the right things, but the wrong person is saying it. And that was really difficult to work through when we knew we'd got the right answer, but we hadn't got that engagement from the wider trust teams. Our operational teams did take a while to come on board, and they stood by their barriers. We can't change that. We've always done it that way. It's always been like that at Robert Jones, are things that we heard again and again and again. And even when we removed those barriers, and believe it or not, time and money became not a problem to estates and facilities, the lack of cohesion led to some real discontent within our teams. The clinical teams were displaced at absolutely no notice. You need to move out of your ward, and you need to do it now. Estates teams were battling unrealistic lead times, refurbishments at 6 hours notice. And funnily enough, our contractors didn't quite think that that was a reasonable expectation. From a cleaning perspective, contract cleaners were brought in to act as a sticking plaster. We'll send someone in to deep clean it and it'll all be fine tomorrow. But that really didn't solve problems the day after tomorrow. And one of the things that personally was quite difficult for me from a facilities perspective was the post-refurbishment cleaning. So we had wards that were ripped apart. You can see by some of the pictures here, we literally went down to the bare bones of wards. And in this example here at the top, this is actually our spinal injuries ward. We had contract cleaners that had never been on site before, scrubbing plaster dust off floors at 3 a.m. and we're expected to have patients in the beds on that ward at 8 a.m. the next morning. And that just wasn't what we were used to working with and wasn't what we expected to deliver as a facilities team.
So, how did we move on and move forward? So, we had board level recognition of the need to prioritise IPC across all disciplines. So we went from Gladstone Ward have an outbreak to we have an outbreak. It's on Gladstone Ward. What support do they need? What help do they need? We had an IPC and cleanliness working group with key influential players around the virtual table at the time, focusing on what we can do rather on what we think we might be able to do based on user-defined limitations. Fact versus story. So the group visited areas to gain oversight and prove the support was tangible and real. Actions being fired at all teams from all different angles became an IPC improvement plan with over 150 actions, but these actions were all prioritised and defined and were transparent. And the plan acts as a catalyst for change, supported by stringent governance processes that are embraced rather than fought. But this did require strong leadership to ensure delivery and remove the obstacles when we encountered them. Both the working group and the action plan promoted ownership, but further than this, collaboration at levels as a trust we hadn't seen before. So we were learning, we were sharing that learning between our wards and our AHP colleagues. We did an inspection of our therapies department, and we were able to apply the same principles to them and have made lots and lots of improvements. So we've replicated those ward level improvements within our departments as well. So I've just lost my this one. So, as we mentioned before, for RJH, the IPC working group became and remains to this day the key to our success, really. The group has organisational respect and authority built from resolving problems, delivering outcomes in a collegiate and professional manner. In practice, what that means for the group is that regardless of the issue, whether it be an outbreak, an internal review or an external audit, it becomes our problem and our solution. We take the time to consider what a problem looks like from each stakeholder's perspective. A hole in a wall in a bay, for example, to me as an IPC nurse, that's an infection risk. To facilities, it's an area that we can't clean, so that's going to bring down the star rating and people are going to ask us and challenge us on that. To an estates department, it's an area that maybe they can't access, or money that we'll need to spend that we need to prioritise. And to the ward manager, it's a problem that they can't solve and that they need support to be able to drive those improvements. And ultimately to the patient, because the patient may see that we have a ward that we don't care about or that isn't clean, and what else does that make the patient think? That maybe we just don't really care about them.
So on to some reflection. I really want to call out our therapies team. Very often, when it comes to IPC and facilities, we focus on wards and those inpatient areas. And actually, our therapies team, who were at the centre, as Anna mentioned, of our second wave of external inspections, now stood in their lovely refurbished outpatient area, which I haven't got a before photo because I just think we were too traumatised to take the before photo. That area was pre-war at best. But their experience is the reality of when you've actually changed a culture, because by the time that their actions were identified, as the multidisciplinary team, we knew that we could wrap ourselves around them, we could get things done, regardless of the scale of work that was required, we were able to support them immediately. And we have that blueprint now going forward, and there will still be areas of the trust that one day Anna will open a door and I'll get a phone call saying, come here now. But we do know how to approach that and how to resolve those problems in a collaborative manner. There is definitely a new business as usual at RJH. Structure and process and governance are used to drive improvements, and I know I'm going to say that as a compliance manager, but actually they are embraced. They're not there to be used as blockers. They're there to give us comfort around staff being able to raise concerns and perceived failures. And I know we don't like the word failure, but often that is the reality of what we're looking at. But to give them the confidence that we will work together to find a solution, and that governance will help them to get there. We are very proud to have made it from the NHSE oversight framework, which for us we refer to as the naughty step, and will always be referred to as the naughty step at the Robert Jones, to achieving exemplar status for cleaning within 24 months. And that was actually only ever going to be possible through working together. And I hope that the fact that this presentation is a double act and IPC and Estates and Facilities are here together does underline our collaborative approach. And even on the way here today, one of the comments I made was, if we had to reshuffle offices tomorrow, the person in the trust that I could quite easily share a desk with would be Anna as the IPC nurse, because 9 times out of 10, we end up together anyway. And that really is exactly how we approach things at RJH. I did just want to mention, before we welcome any questions, or possibly at the end of the next presentation, we always extend an invite to anyone who wants to make the journey to our lovely rural Shropshire to visit us. It's quite easy for us to describe what's happened, but sometimes seeing it in person really is perfect. And that kind of ethos was definitely instilled in us by Sam Young, who was our Deputy Chief Nurse. And Sam did present this presentation. She wrote half of this presentation with us and delivered it at the IPZ conference in April of this year. Unfortunately, she was suddenly killed earlier in the summer, and it has been very difficult for us as a trust over the last couple of months to find out how we move on without having such a influential mentor, therapist and leader with us. But actually the blueprint that Sam's given us and the blueprint that we've described to you today is something that we hope we've been able to carry on for her. And so we hope we've done her proud and told her story, because many of the words that you've heard today are Sam's voice, and we hope we've done it justice.